Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. So in this episode, I want to talk about how to move forward from a relationship with someone that you really loved that didn't work out. And this can apply actually to a lot of things where there was pain and your mind is wanting to recapitulate, or you're going back over it, or there's sadness. But I'm going to focus on this as part of the theme where I see it really arise in people's lives, which is they have left a relationship. It wasn't the right thing, or in the process of leaving a relationship, they're super clear. And to be specific, if you're in the place where you're exploring leaving a relationship, there's a part of you that really wants to leave a relationship, you're totally welcome to listen to this, but this counsel is really for once you are taking right action on leaving the relationship. And the 2-part podcast on do I stay or do I go is going to be a lot more relevant if you're still in the conflict of that, if you're still back and forth and one day you think it's going to all work out and yes, there's hope, and the next day you're like, no, this is terrible, I need to leave, and everything in between, and your mind's really chewing on the question. That's the podcast to go to that has my wisdom for when you're making the decision. And it's important to be on the step that you're legitimately on, because a lot of times we really, really, really want to have left, want to be ready to go, when there's a part of us that just hasn't actually made that decision. And so it's okay if you're using this podcast where you're like, no, I'm really clear. This doesn't work for me. It's not going to work out. I need to step away. Even if you just need to step away in some decisive way, like, I don't know if I'm going to divorce him or not, but I'm going to go get my own place and take 6 months and be in therapy and get this sorted and get out of our dynamics. Like, that's legitimate for this too. And it's okay if there's still parts of you that are kicking and screaming. If there's still parts of you that are like, now would be a good time to text. I should go check the Facebook page of my ex. Maybe I made a mistake. We could just have sex one time. It'll just be no strings attached sex. Like, there can be this frantically in the background, bargaining, manipulative part of yourself telling you the story that, like, more engagement would be just fine. It's okay if you're missing them terribly. It's okay if you're thinking about them a lot. It's okay if there's a lot of just loudness on the emotional radar for this process to work. I'm going to walk you through how you go from, I was in really deep with someone, it didn't work out, I needed to step away from the relationship, and I need to come home to myself. I need to move through all the emotional complexity, and I want to give you a map to do this as effectively and efficiently as possible, because it's a painful place to be, and you can be in the argument with yourself and bargaining stage of grief where you're coming up with all these ideas of like, maybe you don't have to have this loss. And loss of relationship when you've stepped away because it's not good for you is particularly vulnerable to the bargaining stage of grief, because in many cases, the person who is certainly not available to be different in the way that would really work for you would be still really interested in re-engaging. Sometimes you're the one who's left, and this process can be really, really good for getting your mind and heart back so they're not gravitating as though to magnetically pulled toward the person. And it's hard, we can have our awareness really returning to that person, especially if it's been a tumultuous dynamic, especially if there's a soul connection, especially if emotions run really deep, especially if you spend a lot of time working out, do I stay, do I go, especially if it was someone else who ended it, but they ended it without proper closure, so they just ghosted you. Like, that's another one that can be really, really hard to come back to you and have your mind not wanting to think about the relationship where it didn't work out. This can happen with friendship. I love the work that I get to do with the soul retrieval because I get to hear people's life stories, and I get to hear of all the things that have happened to them where they really got stuck with a pain point. And sometimes it's a friendship that ended over time. Either they ended it or the other person ended it. Sometimes it's a complicated relationship with a family member that they love a lot, but just really can't have ease and sustainability with. And this map is also really good for releasing relationship to trauma. So there's a lot in here. It's more focused if you go to the elegant trauma release with shamanism, but there are a lot of the same mechanisms in the brain that will have us minding our own business and then decide to recapitulate all of our emotionality about a traumatic event or an ex. And understanding how your brain works that way is the way that you can learn how to hack it, activate neuroplasticity, and persuade your brain that it's actually not doing you a favor by continuing to bring up your ex every moment. So that's some things that I'd love to support you with in this episode. So another way to illustrate where you might be when I think this would be most useful would be if you were at the place where, if you were, let's say you were an alcoholic and you've managed to stop drinking and you're in a program that's really effective, but what it's not doing for you is you're like, I am arguing with myself all the time about alcohol. I'm thinking about alcohol constantly. I'm not drinking, like I've figured out how not to be in the physical relationship with alcohol, but I'm constantly arguing with myself, trying to rationalize a drink. It's coming up all the time, and this is exhausting. Like, it's exhausting to have this in my mind. I just want to be sober and not be thinking about using again. And so that's kind of where we're wanting to get to is, you have clarity, but there's still a lot of emotionality and there's a lot of pull and there's bargaining that's getting really loud and arguing with the person and analyzing the situation. And it's just taken up a lot of space in your brain. I find it maddening when my brain is occupied with something that isn't useful or valuable or life-affirming or helpful, and I'm just going round and round and round on it and stirring the emotional pot within me over some trigger. So I'm quite fascinated with all the tools that are really good for hacking that and for really getting that to shift for myself. So at the most basic level, we in modern society are not particularly good with grief. And one of the places that, if you hear nothing else about this, would be really useful is in recognizing that when there's a soul that you have a profound connection to, when there's a specialness of the magic that just danced between you and this other person, with the inside jokes, with perhaps the lovemaking if it was a romantic dynamic, with the being seen and met, with perhaps the psychic communication where you knew what the other person was saying without them speaking a word, that which was unique and special and precious. And it's 1,000 times greater for those of us who are really engaged at the metaphysical or the energetic or the psychic or the intuitive level, whatever language you want to use for this attribute of our awareness that's part of our compass and our core essence, this ability to perceive the unseen world and have a meaning in our relationship with it. It's a really key part. And when you find someone who matters to you for reasons that speak to that part of you and it doesn't work out, that's really sad. I have been really heartbroken at someone not choosing that with me, or not being healthy enough to show up in a way that could have worked for me, or being geographically inconvenient. And I think that we're so resourceful with bargaining and figuring things out and creative in the modern era that some of what our ancestors accepted as a given, there are ways to work around it. And so going to just the core grief of, I'm really sad I don't get to play with this soul, is a big part of it. I'd invite you to listen to the podcast, if you haven't already, on Find Your Tribe and Soul Connections. It's episode 19, and I think that's a really important one when you're going through this process, because your brain is going to tell you there are no other fish in the sea, and the one thing we have an abundance of is people, and old souls are incarnating in this time. So the richness of undiscovered people that you could have amazing experiences with is really abundant, but it's definitely not going to feel this way on an average day. And it's really, really not going to feel true if you're in the middle of a breakup and restoring your heart. So having an accurate picture of reality is super helpful, and then getting in right relationship to grief, because lots of people make lots of choices that are about avoiding grief. I remember in Death Valley, my guides really sat me down and they said, look, you're holding a destiny path open for the potential of having children. And in your heart of hearts, you've really decided that the right path doesn't include children in this lifetime, but you don't want to mourn the fact that you'll never hold your baby in your arms because you're compelled by other things. And I feel really good about the things that I'm compelled by and the things that I'm engaged in. I knew that I would get to do fewer soul retrievals if I was the guardian of a child, and my interest and talent and affinity moves in ways that some of them would not make me a particularly good mother. And without going too much into the details of that, the guide said, look, you're not letting go of this, and you're losing energy because you're not closing the destiny path and letting yourself mourn the loss of a really rich human experience that you're not going to have in your life in a particular way. And they said, you're resourceful. If you change your mind later, you can reopen the destiny path, but don't hold it to avoid the grief. And one of the things for that back of the mind bargaining part of you that wants to hold on to the connection, because maybe what if they changed, and what if it was different, and what if they woke up one day and they realized how cool you were and amazing and what they were giving up, and if I really move on, that won't be available. I would say that that's a good thing. So there's this feeling like if I secretly hold on to the cord that ties me to this other person, I'm keeping a door cracked for something in the future. And what I would offer is if you completely release everything, and then they did come around again, and you'd mourned it, and you'd worked through it, and you'd released it, and the contemporary version of both of you chose each other again, you would actually have a chance of making it work. But as long as there's some part of you that's like holding on and not letting go, the next thing you know, all the hurt and anger and pain from the past is going to spill in. I got totally wrapped up in a Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce. It was this series, and lots of it was complete fluff. But there was this one episode where this couple had reunited. They had this deep love and the chemistry, and they were getting divorced, and they got together, and no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't keep having the same fights they were having. And this deep, yeah, we don't work together, however much we wish it was different, however much we love each other. And I thought it was really beautiful to have the complexity of that represented in a kind of a playful, guilty pleasure type TV show. And so truly, if you really deeply would like it to come around again, letting it go, coming home to yourself, healing completely, and really vibrating the contemporary version of you actually gives it the best chance, because the weird interaction of exes throwing energy at each other and pulling on each other and courting each other and everything else is just energy leaks, and it sort of keeps a pattern locked that's really not good. And I know that learning how to cut cords and come home to yourself is probably a skill that you're like, yeah, Katie, that sounds awesome. That's not what's happening for me. So I'm going to offer you some tips for that. However, recognizing and just hearing the part of you that's like trying to secretly, keep a stash. It's kind of like the alcoholic who's like, well, maybe I'll just keep a bottle of alcohol in the very back of the cupboard in case, I decide that I want it again. I get it. And they're probably going to have a lot louder head if they know that it's just in the back of the cupboard and they would just have to go get on a chair to get it, versus if they actually had to leave the house and go acquire it. It's good to create a field that doesn't have the thing in it. So I just want to offer that for the part of you that maybe is saying, well, I still really love them if circumstances were different. Move through the stages of grief and recognize that they're not linear. A lot of people think, okay, I'm in bargaining. That means I'm moving along. They all get mashed together. Multiple ones can exist at different times, but recognizing when you slip into bargaining is really important, because a lot of people get stuck on the bargaining, and their mind just recapitulates over and over and over again and goes through all the data points that you went through and coming to the clarity that this wasn't a good thing, and ultimately comes to that conclusion again. But meanwhile, you've created more neural pathways that tell you to keep solving the problem. So the challenge for people is they leave the relationship, they get clear, they start doing the inner work, they start coming home to themselves, and then at a mellow, quiet time, they're winding down for bed, and their brain is going to bring up their ex to them. And the reason for that is there's a lot of emotional value tagging. And again, in the Elegant Trauma Release podcast, I talk a lot about that. Your brain is like, okay, there's a problem here because there's all this complicated emotion on this thing. And your instincts are like, this is either a threat or a really important opportunity. So if there's stress and angst about it, this is something that could hurt you. And if there's excitement and charge on it, it's something that could be super good for survival. Either way, now that your brain isn't heavily occupied in driving cars and trying to do a bunch of other things, let's bring this up so that we can work through it. And what your system is looking for is emotional neutrality. And so if you think all the thoughts and you recapitulate everything and you get all wound up again, you reinforce that your brain has done a good thing by bringing up this thing that's unresolved. And what we're wanting to do is tell the brain, thanks for bringing it up. That's handled. You don't need to keep bringing it up to me. And so for women, this is particularly challenging because we have diffuse awareness. So I use the example of driving your car being a time where you weren't thinking about this, but actually driving the car, doing the dishes, this, that, and the other thing, it can be coming up. And it can be very disruptive because it's emotionally value tagged, which means your brain wants to pay attention to it over responding to emails or doing whatever is boring in your job. And I really found that when I was stewing about a romantic relationship that I was or wasn't in, my ability to function as fully as I could in the other areas of my life was super compromised. And that was a bummer. It had impact on a whole bunch of things. And so in working with this, when you notice yourself thinking about the person, the first step is to celebrate. It's usually we want to kind of smack ourselves. Why am I still hung up on him? I should be over him already. And the truth is you're not over until you're over. If you need my help or someone else's, I love to help people really come home to themselves, get their soul parts back, clear the cords in the one-on-one work. I'm so passionate about that. But in the moment, you can do a lot for yourself if you just celebrate, give yourself a thumbs up, say, yay, I noticed, it's awesome that I noticed, because then you're rewarding your mind for noticing. It's the same in meditation when you are trying to meditate and then you realize you're planning dinner, and you could be mad at yourself for planning dinner, or you could be like, that is just the deal when you sit down and try to meditate. So then you bring your awareness back to the mantra or whatever, the breath or whatever it is that you're doing to meditate. And then your mind runs off again and then you bring it back. And so you really want to give yourself a reward for the awareness that you notice that you're recapitulating this, because this is just the physiology of the brain, how the brain works. And then once you've noticed, I invite you to take some really deep breaths. You can tune in and see if there's some emotion that wants to be felt or heard. Maybe you cry, maybe you stomp your feet and jump up and down. Maybe you take some deep breaths because it's really scary. Looking for fear, anger, sadness will simplify. There are a lot of complicated words that are very nuanced, but it can be a simpler model to just say, what am I feeling right now? Is it all three? Is it one of those? Is it two of those? And then take some slow, deep breaths. So anything that you do that's a stress reduction technique, the 4-7-8 breath where you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, breathe out for 8, just deep, slow belly breaths. It could be breath of fire. There are lots of different ways that you could play with moving the breath. But if you're taking slow, deep breaths and you're bringing your intensity down, you're telling your brain, hey, this is okay. You don't need to keep bringing this up. And it'll check in with you a couple of times, but the more consistent you are with it, the more it works. And one of the problems is people use this technique a couple of times, they won't get results, and they'll fling up their hands and be like, it's hopeless. And this is just really a work of dedication. Anyone who's developed a meditation practice knows how many thousand times you come back to your breath, because that's the deal. But you get benefit from it all the way around. So even if that coming home to yourself where you check in with your emotions, you pay attention to something you want to have your attention on, you bring your awareness to the body, to the beauty of the world around you, to what do I smell, what do I feel, like all these come home, get present with yourself techniques, you'll be better for the next however many minutes that go by when your mind is back present and available to you. So a successful round of this is when you do, an unsuccessful round of this is when you don't do. And please don't give up because you don't get instant results. It took a lot of hours of mental gymnastics to establish these really potent neural pathways. And every time you interrupt, you're activating neuroplasticity in your brain, and it's literally rewiring itself. But that takes time, and our brains are predisposed not to rewire themselves unless it's necessary, because it takes a lot of resources. And so that's where you're like, yep, brain, I really do want you to rewire this. It is worth it. We don't have food scarcity. I will provide you with the calories you need, but we're on it. So that's a really important piece. There's all the stuff you probably already know, like self-care, connecting with beloved friends, movement, downtime, meditation, everything that you would do that you would recommend for a friend that was going through this, unless you're the friend who says the best way to get over a guy is to get under a new guy. In that case, like don't listen to yourself if you're that friend. But the more emotionally intelligent, balanced friends who don't think that taking you out drinking and getting you laid is the best way through. Like, there are plenty of people who advocate that. I'm going to advocate something else, which is really coming home to yourself and recognizing the need to bring your mind back. There's a fire ceremony on the articles page of my website. As a daily practice, it's incredibly good for dismantling these neural pathways. So you just put all your complicated feelings into the fire and invite yourself to be peaceful and to be home with yourself. There's a addiction aspect to this because we get addicted to repeated intense feelings to the point that our cells literally crave it. So somebody who is mad all the time, who gets a meditation practice and stops being angry, is going to have a detox because their body's expecting all the angsty chemicals that came with all these thoughts, and it's going to try to balance itself by bringing up thoughts that get the biochemistry hit that you're used to. And when you remember the good times and long for them, the being in love thing and the sexual attraction and all of that light up a lot of the same parts of the brain as cocaine. So how potent the rush on the inside of everything related to relationships and dating is really intense. And so treating end of relationship a little bit like a detox process coming off of drugs is not the worst perspective. Drink lots of water, get lots of sleep, and let your body rebalance. So if you feel like this person is the only one in the world that makes you happy and everything else is dull and gray, somebody who's been really spiking their pleasure hormones with ecstasy probably going to feel the same way. It's just recognizing that, see what it's like once you get your chemistry back in balance, because so much happier, and I'm dating, I'm having sex, I have people that I'm in love with, I'm having those experiences, but I'm doing it in a non-addictive way, which is different than when I was younger. And so just recognize that, this too shall pass. So it's a lot about putting your inner wise man or your inner wise woman in the driver's seat and allowing them to take the wheel. So whether you feel like it or not, if fire ceremony resonates, doing fire ceremony, doing slow, deep breaths when the thoughts come up, bringing yourself back present. These kind of disciplines over time will get you back having custody of the mind, so you aren't just haplessly obsessing about this person, because the trouble is when you're obsessing, you're just increasing the size and intensity of the neural pathways. So again, this is good practice for anything that you're recapitulating over and over again in your mind. I'm not saying that it isn't good to have some introspection. I think that if it's a big trigger, facilitated introspection is going to get you a lot further. So that could be working with someone like me, that could be working with a therapist, but sometimes we just really need some help and support, and I think that that's super, super important and can really fast track you. But a lot of times where somebody done you wrong, or you had a childhood trauma or survived a form of abuse that you can't get over, there are all these ways that our mind keeps working with them, and knowing how to activate neuroplasticity so that our mind stops feeling like it needs to bring up a pain point from the past is an incredibly powerful skill to have. And again, we don't live in a society that teaches us a lot of custody of the mind stuff. And so a lot of times you're starting from scratch. It'll be a little easier if you are used to some disciplined practices. But just know that it really is possible to redirect your brain. It just needs adult supervision, because the parts of you, they're just parts of us when we leave somebody that we really love, that are like the 5-year-old who just doesn't understand why daddy's not there, and doesn't understand why daddy said you'd go to Disneyland and then you didn't. And it doesn't matter how many times daddy promises Disneyland and Disneyland doesn't happen, or mommy does. I don't mean to, go with the most common gendered aspect of this. There are lots of parents who are super great, co-parents after a divorce, but we all probably know circumstances of children who just believe a parent that is unreliable over and over and over again. And no matter how much pain is caused, the psychology of a child doesn't give them the capacity to know that. Your mileage may have varied a little bit on that as a child, because if you're a really old soul, there's a certain wisdom that can have your results look a little different than the sort of standard psychological profile. But most 5-year-olds aren't able to be like, yeah, when the adult says this thing, you can't trust them because they're not reliable. They believe over and over again. And that's a part of us that we're navigating in this, that if the person calls us up and says, oh, it's going to be different, or, it was really good in the past, we're just sure that magically we could find a way to get to the good stuff again. And, infinite compassion with that part, infinite kindness, but just recognizing that it's not a good part of predicting reality or predicting actual outcomes, and listening to it and letting it run the show is a path of a lot of suffering, a lot of just being pulled into something that really isn't actually going to get you what you want, but will leak a huge amount of emotional and psychological and spiritual energy. So I hope this is really helpful. It is a real work of discipline to celebrate when you notice, and then complete the cycle. Take the deep breaths, drop your levels, come home to yourself, feel the emotions that are being felt. A lot of us have an emotional avoidance strategy by ruminating in our mind. We start thinking things through or having arguments with people in our mind because we don't want to be with the sadness or the fear or the anger, the core emotion that is underneath. And so spinning low-level emotion with a lot of thinking is often more comfortable. And remember that it's more comfortable to be angry than to be sad. And so a lot of us in a grief process move ourselves to anger with our stories and our thoughts and our argument with the reality of what the person did. And I have a lot of compassion and understanding for the naturalness of that. Like, anger chemistry in the short term feels a lot better than grief chemistry. Over time, anger chemistry will make you really sick. It depletes the immune system, does lots of bad things, but in the moment, it feels a heck of a lot better. And so watching ourselves, that we come home and stay on the path that really does take us clear of this. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this is helpful and supportive for you in navigating this pathway. A lot of times there's a confusion about, but it's a soul connection, it's a soulmate, it's a twin flame. Doesn't that mean it's meant to be? And what I would say from 20 years of experience working with my own love affairs and lots of other people's is, often there is a really deep, profound soul connection, but that's an independent marker for whether you align to be in each other's lives in this particular incarnation. And so not having those maps, we don't necessarily understand that it doesn't follow that it's supposed to work out if you could just find the trick. There's a real particular specific pain that comes from having a soulmate who is not suitable to be in your life. And so if you're going through that, I'm really sorry. I know it can be intensely painful, and I hope this helps you to get clear of it so that you can have connections that have a deep soul alignment, have a deep soul harmony, and are aligned with you in a really contemporary way. So you're not falling in love with someone because you loved them so much 3 lifetimes ago and they saved you, but you're falling in love with them because they are such a joy of a person to participate with for contemporary reasons, for who you are, not only in this lifetime, but at the age you are, at the moment in your journey you are, because loving people for the present moment rather than past history just tends to make for such better outcomes. And again, you can love someone deeply and allow yourself to love them deeply, but just if you're caught up in how much you love them, reorient to all the other things you love, the other people you love. So let yourself take a breath and feel the depth of your love for this soul that isn't the right person to be in your life. But then remember the trees that you love and the butterflies you love and the experiences you love. So you let your heart not try to be on one channel. We're meant to love as a field. We're meant to love many things and many people, many experiences, and allowing yourself to have your heart just paying attention to one kind of love that you're not being met in really makes the heart ache, literally ache. And so allow yourself to love the person, but then open your heart to all the other things you love and breathe those through. That's another really good trick. So lots of love to you. I hope that if you're listening to this and you're in an ouchy place, you really feel the vibrational transmission that I'm intending for you as I speak the words, and that it eases your hopelessness about being stuck in this and some of your pain, and helps you really see that there's a way through, and it can be a pretty quick way through if you're following the right map, if you're not wandering off on what feels right but maybe isn't quite as effective. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.